Well, joining me now is Israel's ambassador to the United Kingdom, Tzipi Hotovely. Welcome to you. Boris Johnson, Prime Minister, as you know, has appealed for restraint on both sides. What's Israel's response to that request?
Mr. Boulton, rather than your Prime Minister Boris Johnson urging both sides to restrain themselves, which will do nothing to bring peace, he should be condemning unequivocally the rotten Palestinian leadership which have mercilessly abused the Palestinian people and led them down a path of war. He should be saying to the Palestinians to stop firing rockets into Israel and luring the poor Palestinian people into a completely unnecessary war.
But as you well know, the United Nations has repeatedly said that the settlements are illegal in international law and should cease, and those are continuing.
Mr. Boulton, are you providing an excuse for terrorists to lob missiles into my country because we're building a few settlements? Honestly, how can you equate the two? How can you equate the building of homes and houses with terrorists lobbing missiles into my country? You're providing an excuse for terrorists, aren't you? You're a terrorist sympathizer. Now, talking of settlements, that may well be a dispute with the Palestinians that my country has, but that is to be sorted out in diplomacy, not through the lobbing of rockets into my country. Because if the Palestinians think they're going to get their way by shooting rockets into Israel, they've got another thing coming. And sadly, the people that are going to lose out the most in this are the Palestinian people who are being led astray by their rotten terrorist leadership.
It's a bit rich to say the United Nations should do something when Israel is ignoring what the United Nations has said in the context of settlement.
If the United Nations really do care about the Palestinian people, they would ensure that their rotten leadership stops firing missiles into my country. I keep saying the same thing again and again, but Mr. Boulton, you don't seem to accept this. And if you yourself, Mr. Boulton, really care about the Palestinian people, you'd have the Palestinian leadership in here, in this studio, and you should be grilling them about why every few years they keep luring their people into one war after another, which has brought the poor Palestinian people nothing but misery and failure.
The question is the retaliation and the attacking of civilians in Gaza and elsewhere, which, as we know, once again is leading to disproportionate suffering on the Palestinian side.
Oh, I can talk to you about disproportionality, Mr. Boulton. Let's talk about the billions and billions and billions of dollars which has been fed through to the Palestinian Authority over the last 20 years since the Oslo Peace Accords. Where has all that money gone? Israel, I should remind you, removed itself, pulled out of Gaza in 2005, and Gaza and the Palestinian areas there were supposed to be the Singapore of the Middle East. What has happened to that money? It has been disproportionately siphoned off away from the Palestinian people to the greedy dictatorship that is the Palestinian leadership that has kept all the money for themselves. They all go around the Middle East in private jets while they leave intentionally their people in squalor. So we can see what disproportionality has taken place. They've kept the money for themselves and routed not a single dollar to their poor Palestinian people. So I'll talk to you about disproportionality.
If you stop the attacks, you wouldn't be killing Palestinian children.
Mr. Boulton, if you really care about the Palestinian children that you purport to care about, why on earth are you not grilling Hamas and the rotten Palestinian leadership? It's the same question again and again that I'm asking, and I'm not getting an answer for you. You're saying that if I stop the attacks against Gaza, then innocent Palestinian children won't die anymore. Well, let me ask you, if I don't defend myself, children on my side will get killed, and there have been children killed already. Are you saying that I have to wait until a certain number of children on my side get killed before I'm allowed to not retaliate but defend myself? Mr. Boulton, I thought you're an intelligent journalist, but your questioning is just absolutely doesn't stack up. Come on, Mr. Boulton, you can ask me some more intelligent questions than that you've asked already. Come on, what's your next question?
Asking you on behalf of the Israeli government, would you accept that there was overreaction and indeed brutality?
Brutality? Mr. Boulton, you've obviously been living with your head in the sand. If you want to see brutality, I suggest you go for a holiday to Gaza and see what will happen to you. Gaza is a cesspit of dictatorship a cesspit of poverty that the poor Palestinian people have had to endure under the brutality of their stupid regime, which the Western world is putting up with. There were supposed to be elections every 3 or 4 years. This Mahmoud Abbas is still there, and he still won't hold elections, holding the Palestinian people to ransom. So we can talk about brutality. Go and see what the Palestinian leadership, what Hamas do to their political rivals. I'll tell you, obviously, again, you're living with your head in the sand, so I will educate you, Mr. Boulton. They drag people, their political opponents, up to the 5th floor of a building, and they just chuck them out alive. They're obviously dead when they reach the bottom, sadly, and then they get tied up and dragged by jeeps across the streets of Gaza. So I'll talk to you about brutality. Come on, Mr. Boulton, ask me some more intelligent questions. I'm getting a bit bored with your questioning. But alas, I will answer your question of overreaction and brutality. What do you want me to do? You want me to just sit tight until a certain number of innocent civilians on my side die? Is that what you're suggesting? Come on, Mr. Boulton, you can do better than that. Oh, and Mr. Boulton, I don't hear you talking about the brutality of indiscriminate missile launching into my country. Not only are they aiming missiles at my civilians, which is brutality in itself, they're abusing the Palestinian people by using them as human shields, which is well documented on your very channel. So come on, Mr. Boulton, you can do better than that.
Because of possible prosecutions he might face, and that whipping up a security situation or allowing a very dangerous security situation to take place may be simply a cynical way of saving himself.
Again, your questioning doesn't stack up at all. Mr. Netanyahu, our Prime Minister, did not choose the timing of this war. If he had a choice, he wouldn't choose war at all. However, we have no choice. The Prime Minister has no choice. Hamas are firing indiscriminately rockets from civilian areas, those poor Palestinians again, into my civilian areas. He did not choose the timing of this war, and he's doing what any decent Prime Minister and responsible Prime Minister would do, and that is to defend the country. I'm not sure why you don't see that, Mr. Boulton. Again, I'm very surprised at the, low caliber of your questioning.
He's biased against the Palestinians. Basically, they have no rights and Jewish people do.
Mr. Boulton, that is not true. If you've done your homework as a journalist, or the good journalist that you are supposedly reputed to be, you'd get your facts right. The Israeli court in Israel does not rule in favor of Jews over Arab citizens. And you should know there have been numerous high court judges that have been Arabs in the Israeli court system in Israel. Now, turning to this particular case, it is a legal dispute where, according to the law, the tenants are being evicted. And it's been a long-running court case as well. So this is not some fly-in-the-night government that's come and just kicked out people from their homes. This is a long-running dispute, and the Supreme Court has now ruled on it. Let me ask you, you seem like a successful journalist. I'm sure you have perhaps 1 or 2 or 3 investment properties. What would happen if your tenants didn't pay rent? Would you just sit on your rear end and say, oh, I can't evict you? Or you'd take legal action through the court system to evict them? Come on, Mr. Boulton, we know exactly what you do. You take action legally through the court system to evict them, and that is no different in this case here. So this idea that the court is ruling in favor of Jews over Arabs because it's biased or racist is completely unfounded.
But it also stands, doesn't it, that the two-state solution cannot be possible so long as the settlement program continues and the claiming of East Jerusalem.
Mr. Boulton, don't make me laugh. To suggest that the building of settlements is an obstacle to peace is a nonsense. Israel stopped building settlements in Gaza. They withdrew from it. They gave it to the Palestinians and said, build your state, make a success of it. All Israel got in return were rockets, and the poor Palestinian people, don't forget them, all it's brought them is more misery because they are being led by a bunch of terrorists who are using them and abusing them. Why do you think settlements are an obstacle to peace? The obstacle to peace, Mr. Boulton, as you can very well see, is the Palestinian leadership, not settlements.
There are radicals on both sides, aren't there? There's provocative behaviour by the Israeli police, arguably supported by the Netanyahu regime, and we've seen the demonstrators on the streets saying, you know, kill the Jews, kill the Arabs.
Actually, it's the Arabs calling kill the Jews. You weren't saying something by mistake.
And also, Israeli Jews saying kill the Arabs, get the Arabs out.
Mr. Boulton, in any Western democracy that's democratic and multicultural, Unfortunately, it's a sad fact of life. You will have racial tensions every now and then. May I remind you of the race riots in the United Kingdom, Broadwater Farm riot, the 2011 race riots in West London, and in Bradford and Leeds some 20 years ago there were major riots to do with race relations. So I see that you in the United Kingdom have also suffered from similar problems.
So this confrontation just goes on, right?
Come on, Mr. Boulton. Again, you're more intelligent than that. This conflict ends as soon as Hamas put down their arms and stop firing rockets into Israel, and as soon as they stop using their own people as human shields, and as soon as they stop using and abusing the Palestinian people for political gain by putting Israel down and firing rockets at us. It's not rocket science, Mr. Boulton. Come on, I'm bitterly disappointed with all your questioning. You know, I was hoping you would ask me some really good questions that would really put me on my feet and challenge me. Oh, what an anticlimax.
We said, as a diplomat, you're not really offering much diplomacy, are you?
Diplomacy? I seem to recall the British government didn't offer much in the way of diplomacy with the IRA back in the 80s and 90s, Mr. Boulton. Or have you forgotten that conflict? We always are keeping the door open to diplomacy. All Hamas and the baddies on the Palestinian side need to do are to lay down their arms and stop firing rockets. And if the mindless Palestinian leadership would have a change of heart and choose peace instead of war, then I assure you the Palestinian people have a very, very bright future ahead of them.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Let's hope the situation can be resolved.